In 1943, in the depths of the Second World War, a black tin trunk arrived at Buckingham Palace. The initials embossed on its surface read MHG. Inside lay a treasure that would reshape the British royal family's jewelry collection for generations. Diamond tiaras commissioned from Boucheron in Paris. Emerald necklaces rumored to have belonged to Marie Antoinette. Platinum and pearl creations from Cartier, more than 60 pieces in total. The Queen had been expecting the delivery, but even she seemed surprised by its magnificence. The woman who sent it had died the previous September in a suite at the Dorchester Hotel. Her name was Margaret Greville, and she had spent her life accumulating three things: breathtaking jewels, powerful friendships, and carefully guarded secrets. When her will went through probate that January, London society discovered something extraordinary. Margaret had left her jewelry to Queen Elizabeth, the future Queen Mother. She had left her country estate to the National Trust. She had left thousands of pounds to royalty and charities. What she had not left was a single penny to her husband's family. To understand how a woman born under a cloud of scandal came to own a palace where future kings honeymooned, we need to go back to Edinburgh, to a brewery, and to a secret that would define everything. Before we dive into Margaret's extraordinary story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and if you're fascinated by the hidden lives of the super wealthy and the estates they left behind, subscribe so you don't miss our next journey. Now, let's begin where the fortune started. William McEwan was born in Alloa, Scotland on July 16, 1827. His father owned shares in 4 ships. His mother's family ran breweries. The combination would prove useful. McEwan received his education at Alloa Academy, then left in 1843 to work for the Alloa Coal Company. He spent years as a commercial clerk and bookkeeper, learning the mechanics of business. In 1851, he joined his uncles John and David Jeffrey at their Harriet Brewery in Edinburgh. There, he mastered the craft of brewing beer. 5 years of apprenticeship taught him everything he needed to know. In 1856, at age 29, McEwan took the plunge. He established his own operation at Fountain Bridge in Edinburgh. The Fountain Brewery started small. His mother provided capital. His uncle Tom Jeffrey added financing. Local banks extended loans. McEwan possessed the crucial combination: technical skill, business acumen, and relentless ambition. The business model was straightforward: brew exceptional beer, dominate the local market, expand aggressively. McEwan focused on India Pale Ales, the robust beers designed to survive long ocean voyages to British imperial outposts. The brewing process required precision. Water quality determined everything. Edinburgh's supply flowed from springs in the Pentland Hills, naturally filtered through volcanic rock. The mineral composition created the perfect base for pale ales. McEwan invested in copper brewing vessels imported from England. He hired master brewers who understood fermentation temperatures and yeast management. The production cycle took weeks. Malt arrived from barley fields across Scotland. Workers roasted it in massive kilns, controlling the temperature to achieve precise color and flavor. Hops came from Kent in England, arriving in pressed bales that perfumed the entire brewery district. The British Army became a customer in the 1860s. Military quartermasters needed beer that could withstand tropical heat and long sea voyages. McEwan's India Pale Ale fit the requirements perfectly. Export markets opened across the world: Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, India. Wherever the empire reached, McEwan's beer followed. By the 1870s, ships bearing McEwan's barrels departed Leith Harbour weekly, bound for ports across 4 continents. Competition in Scottish brewing was fierce. Edinburgh and neighboring Glasgow hosted dozens of breweries. William Younger, who would later become McEwan's nephew by marriage, ran a competing operation. The McEwan and Younger families understood that cooperation served them better than rivalry. Strategic marriages united brewing dynasties. Business partnerships spread risk and expanded markets. His nephew, William Younger, joined the firm as an apprentice, eventually becoming managing director. The family connections that defined Scottish brewing created a network of influence and capital. By the turn of the century, McEwan's brewery controlled 90% of sales in northeastern England. The Fountain Brewery produced 456 million pints annually. The facility employed over 800 workers. Steam-powered equipment replaced manual labor. Refrigeration units allowed year-round production. The operation ran 24 hours daily. It was among the largest brewing operations in the world. McEwan's success translated into political influence. In 1886, he won election to Parliament representing Edinburgh Central for the Liberal Party. He campaigned on free trade policies that benefited exporters like himself. His brewery wealth funded his political career. He returned unopposed in 1895 and served until 1900. In 1907, he became a privy councillor, though he declined the offer of a peerage. He preferred his independence. In 1889, William McEwan and Company became a limited liability corporation. The purchase price was £408,000. By the standards of late Victorian Britain, this represented extraordinary wealth. McEwan had transformed himself from a ship-owner's son into one of Scotland's most powerful industrialists. He was generous with his fortune in ways that mattered. In 1897, he donated £115,000 to the University of Edinburgh to construct McEwan Hall as a graduation venue. The sum represented the largest single private donation in the university's history. In today's currency, it approaches £14 million. The ceremonial hall opened in 1897, a neoclassical masterpiece designed by Robert Rowand Anderson. McEwan attended the dedication ceremony. He also donated paintings to the National Gallery of Scotland, works by Frans Hals and Rembrandt. Art collecting became his passion outside business and politics. By the late 1870s, William McEwan had everything a Victorian gentleman could want: a thriving business, political influence, the respect of Edinburgh's elite. What he did not have was legitimacy for the child he had fathered with his employee. Margaret Helen Anderson was born in London on December 20th, 1863. At least that was the city listed on her birth certificate. The document stated that her parents were Helen Anderson and William Murray Anderson. Helen worked as a cook. William Murray Anderson held a position as a porter at McEwan's brewery in Edinburgh. They shared a surname, which made the story plausible. The truth was different. William McEwan was Margaret's actual father. Helen Anderson had been his mistress for years. When she became pregnant, McEwan faced a problem. He was unmarried. She was his employee. Their child would be illegitimate, bearing the social stigma that destroyed reputations in Victorian Britain. Victorian society treated illegitimacy as a permanent stain. Illegitimate children could not inherit titles. They faced legal restrictions on property ownership. Society whispered behind their backs. Respectable families refused marriage alliances. The Church of England considered them born in sin. Even wealthy, illegitimate children struggled for acceptance. The solution required careful planning. McEwan sent Helen and William Murray Anderson to London for the birth. Because they shared the same surname, registry officials would assume they were married. No one would question the documentation. The fiction protected Helen's reputation and gave the child legal legitimacy. McEwan could provide for his daughter without acknowledging the scandal. Margaret grew up understanding the arrangement. Everyone referred to McEwan as her stepfather, but rumors persisted. People noticed McEwan's exceptional generosity toward the Anderson family. They observed how he ensured Margaret received advantages far beyond what a porter's daughter might expect. She received education appropriate for a gentleman's daughter: French lessons, piano instruction, deportment training. Her clothing came from Edinburgh's finest dressmakers. The deception worked because Victorian society wanted to believe it. Acknowledging the truth would force uncomfortable questions about McEwan's character. His business associates preferred the convenient fiction. His political allies looked away. The conspiracy of silence protected everyone's interests. William Murray Anderson died in 1885. Within months, William McEwan married Helen Anderson. Margaret was 21. The marriage legitimized the relationship, though by then most of society had already guessed the truth. The family moved to Mayfair. McEwan had become a respected member of Parliament. His wife was now respectable. His daughter was positioned to enter society. Margaret possessed clear advantages. She had money through her father. She had received proper education. She moved in circles where ambitious young women might meet suitable husbands. In 1891, when she was 28 years old, Margaret Anderson married Captain the Honorable Ronald Henry Fulk Greville. The match was mutually beneficial. Ronald was the eldest son of Algernon Greville, 2nd Baron Greville. His mother was Lady Beatrice Violet Graham, daughter of the 4th Duke of Montrose. The Greville family possessed ancient lineage and aristocratic connections. Their title dated to the 18th century. Their coat of arms hung in parish churches across southern England. What they lacked was substantial money. The British aristocracy in the 1890s faced a financial crisis. Agricultural depression devastated landed estates. Foreign grain imports undercut domestic prices. Death duties consumed inheritances. Ancient families needed capital to maintain their positions. American heiresses married British lords throughout the period. Margaret brought similar financial rescue, though her fortune came from Scottish brewing rather than American railroads. Margaret brought McEwan's brewery fortune to the marriage. Ronald brought entry into the Marlborough House set, the social circle surrounding the future King Edward VII. This group defined fashionable London society. They attended the opera at Covent Garden. They raced horses at Ascot. They hosted weekend parties at country estates. They set trends in fashion, entertainment, and social behavior. The marriage ceremony took place at Calvary Church. Margaret had secured what she needed, an aristocratic husband, access to the highest levels of British society. The transformation from illegitimate brewer's daughter to the Honorable Mrs. Ronald Greville was complete. Margaret and Ronald lived in Mayfair. They entertained. They moved in the right circles. But without a country estate, they remained incomplete. Every family that mattered had a weekend retreat where society gathered, far from the city's noise and scrutiny. Country house weekends defined Edwardian social life. Guests arrived Friday evening by train. They departed Monday morning. The intervening days followed strict routines: morning rides or walks, elaborate luncheons, afternoon activities, tea, formal dinners, card games, and conversation lasting past midnight. Without a proper venue, Margaret and Ronald could not reciprocate the invitations they received. In 1906, William McEwan found what his daughter needed. Polesden Lacey sat on the North Downs in Surrey, 25 miles from London. The location was perfect, close enough for weekend visits, far enough to feel like an escape. The estate occupied high ground with commanding views over Ranmore Common and rolling parkland. The previous owner, Sir Clinton Edward Dawkins, had died the year before. Dawkins had been a civil servant who worked in the colonial office. He had served in Egypt under Lord Cromer, helping manage British imperial finances. Between 1902 and 1905, he had commissioned the architect Ambrose Poynter to extend the original house. That building dated to 1821, designed by Thomas Cubitt in the Regency style. Cubitt had created a gentleman's villa with classical proportions. Poynter's additions had created a substantial country house, suitable for weekend entertaining. McEwan purchased the property for Margaret and Ronald. The precise cost has been lost to history, but the estate included approximately 1,600 acres. Ancient woodlands covered the hillsides. The Long Walk, a 425-meter grass terrace dating to the 18th century, provided stunning views across the Surrey countryside. Gardens surrounded the house. Outbuildings included stables, a carriage house, cottages for estate workers, and extensive greenhouses, everything a proper country estate required. Margaret and Ronald began making plans. They would transform Polesden Lacey into the perfect venue for weekend entertaining. The house would need extensive work: new interiors, modern conveniences, rooms designed to impress royalty. Then Ronald fell ill. In March of 1908, doctors diagnosed throat cancer. Victorian medicine offered limited options. Surgery was the only treatment. Ronald underwent an operation to remove a tumor from his larynx. The procedure took place at a private hospital in London. Surgeons worked without modern antibiotics or sterile techniques. The operation seemed successful. Ronald recovered consciousness. Then complications developed. He contracted pneumonia. His weakened body could not fight the infection. On April 5th, 1908, Captain the Honorable Ronald Greville died. He was 43 years old. Margaret was 45. She had been married for 17 years. The couple had no children. Ronald's death made her a widow. It also made her the sole mistress of Polesden Lacey, with her father's vast fortune behind her. Margaret went into mourning for a year, traveling abroad. Victorian convention demanded the performance of grief. Widows wore black for at least a year. They withdrew from society. They avoided entertainment. Margaret observed the forms while planning her future. But when she returned to Polesden Lacey, she returned with a vision that would require architects who understood how to build palaces. Margaret chose Charles Mewès and Arthur Davis. Both had trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, the premier institution for architectural education in Europe. They had just completed the Ritz Hotel in London, transforming it into the most fashionable establishment in the city. César Ritz himself had supervised the project. Mewès and Davis had created interiors that combined French elegance with English comfort. Their specialty was creating opulent spaces for clients who wanted to impress. Margaret's instructions were specific. The house must be suitable to entertain Maharajas. Every room should make a statement. Comfort mattered, but grandeur mattered more. She wanted guests to gasp when they entered. She wanted rooms that would photograph well for society magazines. She wanted a house that would make the Marlborough House set envious. Mewès and Davis worked from 1906 through 1909. They installed state-of-the-art conveniences that were extraordinarily rare for the era. Ensuite bathrooms with modern plumbing appeared in every major bedroom. Indoor plumbing was still unusual in country houses. Most guests expected chamber pots and shared washrooms. Margaret's house would offer private bathrooms with porcelain fixtures, hot running water, and modern toilets. Telephones appeared in multiple rooms connected to the local exchange. Central heating used a coal-fired boiler to pump hot water through radiators. Each bedroom was designed as a complete suite, offering guests privacy and luxury unknown in most English country houses. The architects made a deliberate choice. Rather than create a unified aesthetic, they designed each room in a different historical style. The result was controlled chaos, opulent eclecticism, a house that announced its owner's wealth through variety rather than coherence. Some rooms evoked Italian Renaissance palaces. Others suggested French Louis XV salons. Still others referenced English Jacobean manor houses. The effect was deliberately theatrical. The central hall became the entrance statement. Guests arrived through a porte-cochere and entered a space designed to impress immediately. Mewès and Davis installed oak paneling and decorative carvings created by Edward Pierce in 1682. The pieces had originally formed the reredos of St. Matthew's Church on Friday Street in London. When the church was demolished around 1883, the fragments became available. Architectural salvage dealers acquired them. Now they lined Margaret's entrance hall, giving immediate historical weight. 17th century craftsmanship welcomed 20th century guests. The saloon surpassed everything else. Margaret wanted a room that would stun. Arthur Davis designed it around an entire Italian salone, dating to approximately 1700, removed from a palazzo and shipped to England. The room measured 40 feet long and 25 feet wide. Every surface received 22 karat gold leaf. Gilders applied the gold using traditional techniques. Each sheet of gold was hammered so thin it would tear at a breath. Workers brushed adhesive onto carved surfaces, then carefully laid the gold leaf. The process took months. Crystal chandeliers imported from France scattered light across mirrored walls. The mirrors themselves were antique, their silvering creating mysterious depths. The effect was overwhelming. This was the room where Margaret would host her most exclusive gatherings. The dining room featured walls of pink Numidian marble, imported from Algeria. Roman emperors had prized this rare stone. Quarries in North Africa had supplied Mediterranean palaces for centuries. The marble showed distinctive veining in cream and rose. Portraits by Rayburn, Lawrence, and Reynolds hung in gilded frames. The dining table could seat 30 guests. Sheffield silver covered the sideboard. Crystal decanters held port and claret. The furniture had been selected from the finest dealers in London and Paris. Some pieces had allegedly belonged to Marie Antoinette herself, salvaged after the French Revolution and passed through aristocratic collections for over a century. The library featured floor-to-ceiling bookshelves in mahogany. Margaret filled them with leather-bound volumes. The collection included first editions, illustrated folios, and sets of classic literature. The The tea room offered views across the south lawn. Margaret designed it for intimate afternoon gatherings. The corridor gallery displayed her growing art collection. Dutch landscapes hung beside Italian religious paintings. The morning room caught Eastern light. The smoking room offered masculine refuge after dinner. By the time Mewès and Davis finished, Polesden Lacey contained 26 showrooms, each designed to impress. The house required 36 servants to maintain operations. The hierarchy was strict. A butler commanded the male staff. A housekeeper supervised housemaids. Footmen served at table wearing livery. Gardeners maintained the grounds. Housemaids cleaned rooms and changed linens. A cook staff capable of producing French cuisine that would satisfy the most demanding guests worked in basement kitchens. A house steward managed the staff and coordinated entertaining. Additional staff appeared for large parties. The wage bill exceeded several £1,000s annually. Margaret hosted her first party in June of 1909. The guest of honor was King Edward VII. His presence validated everything Margaret had built. The king approved. He praised the gold saloon. He enjoyed the food. He returned multiple times before his death the following year. Word spread through London society. Mrs. Greville had created something extraordinary at Polesden Lacey. For the next 30 years, an invitation to Polesden Lacey meant you mattered. Margaret divided her time between her Mayfair townhouse on Charles Street and her Surrey estate. The weekend parties became her specialty. Intimate gatherings of 20 to 30 guests, carefully selected to create interesting combinations. She never invited guests randomly. Each weekend party was curated like an art exhibition. Politicians needed amusing companions. Royalty required respectful but entertaining tablemates. Writers needed patrons. Hostessing was strategic work. The rhythm of a weekend at Polesden Lacey followed strict patterns. Guests arrived Friday evening by motorcar or train to Buckingham Station, where Margaret's chauffeurs collected them. Tea was served in the drawing room. Dinner followed at 8. Margaret seated guests according to rank and conversation potential. After dinner, the ladies withdrew while gentlemen smoked and drank port. The party reunited for cards or conversation. Guests retired late. Saturday mornings offered leisure. Breakfast appeared on sideboards. Guests helped themselves. Some rode horses through the estate. Others walked the gardens. Luncheon was informal. Afternoons featured organized activities or quiet reading. Tea was ceremonial. Dinner Saturday night was the week's social pinnacle. Margaret wore her finest jewels. The menu featured 8 courses. Wines accompanied each dish. Sunday followed a similar pattern, though guests departed after tea. The guest roster read like a directory of power. Winston Churchill came regularly, often accompanied by his wife Clementine. Charlie Chaplin visited when he was in England, providing rare comic relief to aristocratic gatherings. Queen Mary, wife of King George V, became a close friend. She appreciated Margaret's art collection and sharp wit. Queen Ina of Spain, granddaughter of Queen Victoria, stayed multiple times. The Aga Khan brought exotic glamour. Titled dignitaries from across Europe sought invitations. Politicians who shaped British policy discussed strategy over port. Artists and writers who defined the cultural moment found generous patronage. The menus were legendary. Margaret employed French chefs trained in haute cuisine. Dinners began with oysters or caviar. Soup followed. Fish courses featured turbot in cream sauce or Dover sole. Meat courses included venison from the estate, beef from Scotland, or game birds. Vegetables came from the estate's kitchen gardens. Cheese courses offered Stilton and French imports. Desserts featured elaborate confections. Wines were carefully selected. Champagne accompanied oysters. White Burgundy paired with fish. Red Bordeaux accompanied meat. Sauternes accompanied dessert. Port concluded the meal. Margaret's personality generated contradictory assessments. The Queen Mother, who knew her well, later described her as _0_. This was affection mixed with clear-eyed recognition of Margaret's complexity. Others were less charitable. Sir Cecil Beaton called her a galumphing, greedy, snobbish old toad who watered her chops at the sight of royalty and did nothing for anybody except the rich. Lady Leslie told friends she would rather have an open sewer in her drawing room then Maggie Greville. Harold Nicholson claimed Margaret dipped her fountain pen into pots of venom and squirted the mixture at her friends. These assessments reflected Margaret's sharp tongue and social ruthlessness. The truth probably lived somewhere between these extremes. Margaret could be generous. She paid the dental bills for the daughter of the Queen of Spain. She left £20,000 to Princess Margaret in her will. She was loyal to her servants and tolerant of their failings, at least when those failings amused her. One story captures her particular brand of management. Her house steward was frequently drunk during grand dinner parties. The man had served her for years. His drinking was an open secret. Once Margaret scribbled a note from a silver pad kept beside her place. Quote 2. The steward swayed down the table and handed the note to Sir John Simon, a distinguished guest and former Home Secretary. Margaret reportedly found the mistake hilarious. She never fired the steward. She possessed genuine business knowledge. Margaret served on the board of McEwan's brewery after her father's death. She attended meetings. She reviewed financial statements. She voted on strategic decisions. Political figures consulted her about policy. She understood how power worked and cultivated relationships strategically. Her donations to political campaigns bought influence. Her dinner parties shaped policy discussions. In 1922, the government named her Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire for her charitable work and contributions during the First World War. The honor recognized her conversion of Polesden Lacey into a military hospital. Margaret rarely used the title, preferring to be known simply as Mrs. Greville. The aristocratic quote 3 from her marriage mattered more than an awarded title. By the early 1920s, Margaret had cultivated a particularly close relationship with the Duke and Duchess of York. She had plans for them. On the evening of April 26, 1923, a train pulled into Buckingham Station. The Duke and Duchess of York had married that morning at Westminster Abbey. London crowds had lined the streets. Westminster Abbey had been packed with royalty from across Europe. The ceremony had been magnificent. Now they were arriving for the first part of their honeymoon. Cheering crowds lined the route to Polesden Lacey. Village residents waved Union Jacks. Children threw flowers. The Duchess sent a telegram to her mother. Quote 4. Margaret had given them the entire estate to themselves. She stayed at her London house on Charles Street. The newlyweds had Polesden Lacey's 1,600 acres, the marble halls, the gold salon, the extensive staff, all without their hostess present. They used the royal suite, the rooms Margaret had designed specifically for King Edward VII. The bedroom featured a massive 4-poster bed. The bathroom had marble fixtures. The sitting room overlooked the south lawn. The couple spent 1 week at Polesden Lacey. Archive photographs show them playing golf on the estate's private course. They wandered through the gardens, where spring flowers were blooming. They relaxed on the south terrace, enjoying unseasonably warm weather. They rode horses through the woodlands. They had breakfast in bed. They walked the long walk at sunset. The privacy was complete. No photographers, no officials, no family, just newlyweds and discreet servants. Then they traveled north to Glamis Castle in Scotland for the second part of their honeymoon. The Illustrated London News had published a large feature article with photographs of Polesden Lacey before their arrival. The publicity was deliberate. Margaret ensured the nation knew where the royal couple honeymooned. The honeymoon secured the house's place in the British public imagination. Polesden Lacey became forever associated with royal romance. What the Duke and Duchess did not know was that Margaret had written to King George V years earlier. She had stated her intention to leave Polesden Lacey to the Duke of York. Her reasoning was strategic. The elder brother, the Prince of Wales, would inherit the Duchy of Cornwall and all its properties upon becoming king. The younger son needed provision. Margaret had selected Prince Albert as her chosen heir. She cultivated the relationship accordingly. The invitation was genuine hospitality. It was also calculated positioning. From approximately 1913 forward, Margaret had taken special interest in the Duke's welfare. They probably met in person around 1918, when Prince Albert was serving in the Royal Navy. The inheritance plan remained secret from the Duke himself. Margaret told only the king. But Margaret's actions made sense when viewed through this lens. She was building a family of her choosing. The honeymoon was strategic cultivation disguised as generosity. Margaret's position as royal intimate was now unassailable. The Duke and Duchess treated her like family. They visited regularly. They consulted her about social matters. They trusted her judgment. But Margaret's world extended far beyond Polesden Lacey. In May of 1913, William McEwan died in Mayfair at age 85. His estate was valued at £1,500,000. In today's currency, that figure exceeds £200 million. Margaret was his sole heir. Her father had legitimized her through marriage to her mother. Now she inherited everything: the brewery shares, the London properties, the art collection, the investment portfolio, the cash reserves, everything. The fortune enabled Margaret to expand her collecting obsessions. Her father had assembled Dutch 17th century paintings as investments. Works by De Hooch, Van Goyen, and other masters of the period hung in his London house. Margaret added Italian medieval and Renaissance religious works. She purchased European and British portraits. She bought furniture from country houses being demolished. She acquired porcelain from continental dealers. The collection at Polesden Lacey grew to over 9,000 items. Every surface displayed treasures. Every wall bore paintings. Every table held porcelain. She filled the house with furniture from the finest dealers. French pieces from the 18th century came from Paris auction houses. English pieces from country houses being sold off appeared at Christie's and Sotheby's. Some items allegedly came from Marie Antoinette's personal collection, though authentication was always difficult. Provenance documents could be forged. Family stories could be exaggerated. Margaret bought what appealed to her, caring more about beauty than certainty. Margaret's greatest passion was jewelry. She became a regular client at Cartier in London and Boucheron in Paris. The designers knew her taste: modern, spectacular, Baron designed to make statements. She rejected Victorian sentimentality. She wanted Art Deco geometry. She wanted pieces that caught light and commanded attention. In 1921, she commissioned Lucien Hertz of Boucheron to create a diamond tiara with a distinctive honeycomb pattern. The piece represented a complete overhaul of an earlier tiara from her collection. Hertz dismantled the original, resetting the diamonds in a modern design. The honeycomb pattern was distinctive. Geometric precision replaced flowing curves. The tiara became Margaret's signature piece. In 1919, Boucheron had created an emerald kokoshnik tiara featuring a 93.7 carat cabochon emerald in the center, surrounded by rose-cut diamonds and 6 smaller emeralds graduating on either side. The kokoshnik style referenced Russian imperial tiaras. The emerald itself came from Colombia, possibly from mines worked since the Spanish conquest. The platinum setting was modern. The overall effect combined imperial grandeur with contemporary style. In 1929, Cartier produced the Festoon Necklace, a 5-row diamond creation with detachable elements. The necklace could be worn long or short. Elements could be removed and worn as bracelets. The flexibility made it practical for different occasions and gown styles. Margaret wore it frequently, photographed in society magazines. Margaret had jewelry remade when fashion changed. She treated the pieces as investments and status symbols in equal measure. Diamonds could be reset. Settings could be updated. What mattered was the total carat weight and the statement made. The collection would eventually include more than 60 major pieces, though the exact inventory remained her secret. She kept the jewelry in bank vaults. She wore different pieces to different events. She never appeared in the same jewels twice in one season. She traveled extensively during these years. In 1921, Margaret toured India as a guest of the Viceroy. Her visit coincided with the Prince of Wales's tour. She attended state dinners in Delhi. She visited Maharajas who showed her their treasure vaults. She saw emeralds the size of eggs. She examined Mughal jewelry. The experience influenced her subsequent collecting. She traveled to Sri Lanka, Burma, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. The journeys were never purely recreational. Margaret networked globally, cultivating relationships with royalty and leaders wherever she went. She collected contacts like she collected jewels. Margaret's travels brought her into contact with power structures across the world. In the summer of 1933, those travels would take her somewhere that would complicate her legacy forever. In the summer of 1933, Margaret traveled to Germany. Many in Britain's upper classes were curious about what Adolf Hitler was building. The Nazi regime had taken power that January. Reports filtered back about massive rallies, economic revival, and nationalist renewal. Germany seemed to be recovering from the humiliation of Versailles and the chaos of the Weimar Republic. British conservatives saw Hitler as a counterweight to Soviet communism. At a dinner party that year, Violet Bonham Carter had what observers called a violent discussion with Margaret about how Hitler was threatening Jewish people. Violet was the daughter of former Prime Minister H. Asquith. She understood politics. She recognized evil. Margaret was apparently unmoved. She dismissed concerns about anti-Semitism as exaggerated. In September of 1934, Margaret attended the Nuremberg Rally. The spectacle was designed to impress. Hundreds of thousands of uniformed men marched in perfect formation. Banners bearing swastikas lined every street. Searchlights created cathedral effects at night. Albert Speer had choreographed the event like theater. Hitler himself entertained foreign guests. Margaret was among them. When she returned to England, associates reported she was, quote, 5 and, quote, 6. Margaret was not alone in this fascination. Edith Londonderry and Emerald Cunard, fellow society hostesses, also admired Mussolini and Hitler. For many in the British aristocracy, fascism represented a bulwark against communism. They saw order, pageantry, and nationalist revival. They overlooked or dismissed the targeting of Jews, the suppression of dissent, the violence underpinning the spectacle. They convinced themselves that reports of persecution were communist propaganda. In 1936, Margaret planned to attend the Olympic Games in Berlin. The Nazis had transformed the event into propaganda. New stadiums impressed visitors. The regime temporarily removed anti-Jewish signs. International guests saw orderly prosperity. Margaret became ill just days before and could not travel. In August of 1937, she made her final visit to Germany. After that, she slowly began dropping her German contacts. The pattern changed. The invitations stopped. Throughout these years, Margaret hosted German dignitaries at her London home. She attended their embassy receptions. The associations damaged her reputation among those who understood what Nazi Germany represented. But the damage was not fatal. When George VI and Queen Elizabeth were crowned in 1937, Margaret received an invitation to the coronation. She maintained her royal relationships despite the Nazi associations. The royal family overlooked her political naivety. They valued her loyalty and friendship more than her judgment about European politics. The pattern was common among a certain class of British society in the 1930s. Moral blindness combined with political naivety. Margaret saw spectacle and strength. She missed the evil beneath. The war Margaret had witnessed rising in Germany would soon reach Britain. When it did, she would respond not with continued admiration for fascism, but with the resources and commitment that had built her reputation 3 decades earlier. When the First World War began in August of 1914, Margaret was in The Hague. She had been visiting friends in the Netherlands. News of the Belgian invasion reached her. She rushed to Hook of Holland to catch a ferry home. The vessel sailed with nearly 8 times its normal passenger capacity, crammed with people desperate to reach England before the war closed the channel. The crossing was chaotic. Passengers slept on deck. Food ran short. Everyone feared German submarines. Margaret arrived home and immediately converted Polesden Lacey's north and west sides into a non-surgical convalescent hospital for British officers. She consulted with military medical authorities about requirements. She funded the conversion herself. Workers removed furniture from a dozen rooms. They installed hospital beds. They created a medical dispensary. They built ramps for wheelchairs. The facility opened in June of 1915. It accommodated more than 80 patients who recuperated there after treatment at military hospitals. The men had survived surgery. They needed rest and fresh air. Polesden Lacey provided both. Officers walked the gardens. They sat on the south terrace. They played cards in the library. They ate meals prepared by Margaret's kitchen staff. The food was better than army rations. The beds were softer than military cots. The treatment was dignified. Margaret visited daily when she was in residence. She spoke with patients. She wrote letters to their families. She organized entertainment. Musicians performed. She also provided support to the Canadian Maple Leaf Club an organization aiding Canadian Expeditionary Force soldiers stationed in Britain. The Canadians were far from home. The club provided social activities and assistance. King George V and Queen Mary visited Polesden Lacey in 1915, while it operated as a hospital. They toured the wards. They spoke with recovering officers. The royal visit validated Margaret's contribution. Margaret received a commemorative badge acknowledging her philanthropic efforts. After the war, she received a medal for her service. The recognition mattered to her. The contrast between her later enthusiasm for Nazi Germany and her practical British patriotism during both world wars reveals the contradictions that defined her character. Margaret could be simultaneously shrewd and naive, generous and vicious, patriotic and fascist curious. She contained multitudes. By 1936, everything changed. King Edward VIII abdicated in December to marry Wallis Simpson. The abdication crisis shocked Britain. The Duke of York, Margaret's chosen heir, became King George VI. His wife Elizabeth became queen. Neither had expected the throne. Neither had wanted it. The burden fell on them anyway. Margaret's original plan no longer made sense. The new king and queen had inherited all the royal palaces: Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Sandringham, Balmoral, Hillsborough Castle in Northern Ireland, Holyrood Palace in Scotland. Polesden Lacey would be, as Queen Mary later wrote, a white elephant to Bertie. They had no need for another country house. They had no use for another art collection. The gift Margaret had planned for decades had become irrelevant. Margaret changed her will. The estate would go to the National Trust instead. The jewelry would go to Queen Elizabeth. The shift was practical. It was also final. Margaret had built her chosen family. Now she would provide for them differently. The Queen would have treasures to wear. The public would have a palace to visit. The arrangement satisfied everyone. During the Second World War, Margaret funded the purchase of a Spitfire fighter aircraft for the Royal Air Force. Her pattern held. When crisis arrived, her response was British loyalty backed by substantial resources. The Spitfire bore her name. It flew combat missions over France. The gesture was patriotic theater, but it was also genuine contribution. By early 1942, Margaret was 78 years old. She spent less time at Polesden Lacey. The war made country life difficult. Petrol rationing restricted travel. Staff shortages made entertaining impossible. She stayed at the Dorchester Hotel in London. The hotel's reinforced structure felt safer during air raids than her Mayfair house. On March 27th, she signed her final will. 6 months later, she would be gone. On September 15th, 1942, Margaret Greville suffered a cerebral thrombosis at the Dorchester Hotel. The stroke came suddenly. She was 78 years old. Death came quietly in the luxury suite she preferred. A maid found her. Doctors pronounced her dead. The news reached Buckingham Palace within hours. Her estate was valued at more than £1,500,000. In today's currency, that approaches £200 million. The will she had signed that March laid out her final calculations with mathematical precision. Polesden Lacey, approximately 1,000 acres, the house and all its contents, went to the National Trust. The bequest was explicit: for the largest number of people to have enjoyment thereof, in memory of her father, William McEwan. She hoped the collections would form the basis of a picture and art gallery. The estate included everything: the furniture, the paintings, the porcelain, the silver, the gardens, the woodlands, the long walk. Every tree and painting and chair, all her jewels and jewelry went to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Consort. The bequest included the phrase, "with my loving thoughts." Over 60 pieces: diamond tiaras, emerald necklaces, pearl creations, ruby brooches, works by Cartier and Boucheron. Pieces allegedly from Marie Antoinette's collection. The black tin trunk would arrive at Buckingham Palace the following year. Princess Margaret, the king's younger daughter, received £20,000. In today's currency, that equals approximately £3 million. She was 12 years old. The money was placed in trust until her majority. Queen Victoria Eugenie of Spain received £25,000, approximately $4 million today. Eugenie had been Margaret's friend for decades. She had stayed at Polesden Lacey numerous times. They had traveled together. They had corresponded regularly. The bequest recognized their relationship. Sidney Smith, Margaret's chauffeur, received all her motor cars with accessories, plus an annuity of £200 per year. Smith had driven her for years. He knew her habits. He kept her secrets. The bequest ensured his retirement. Charities received more than £17,000. The Anti-Vivisection Society received £10,000, approximately $1,500,000 today, designated specifically for the protection of dogs. Margaret had always preferred animals to most people. Margaret left detailed instructions. Her grave should be on the grounds of Polesden Lacey, near the dog cemetery where her beloved pets rested. Her father's grave at Bouckham Church should be maintained in perpetuity. The art collection should be exhibited according to specific guidelines. Nothing should be sold. Nothing should be removed. The house should remain as she left it. What the will did not include was equally revealing. Nothing went to the Greville family. Ronald's brother Charles, who had become the third Baron Greville after Ronald's death in 1908, received nothing. Ronald's sisters received nothing. No nieces, no nephews, no member of the Greville family was mentioned. After 34 years of widowhood, Margaret owed them nothing. Margaret had been widowed for 34 years. In that time, she had created her own family, royalty, loyal servants. The British public through the National Trust. Blood connections meant nothing. Position meant everything. Chosen family trumped biological ties. Queen Elizabeth initially tried to keep the jewelry bequest quiet. Britain was at war. Displaying vast private wealth seemed inappropriate. Civilians faced rationing. Soldiers died daily. Flaunting diamonds would appear obscene. But in January of 1943, the will went through probate. Wills were public documents. Newspapers across the country revealed the details. The Times published the full bequest. The Daily Mail ran photographs of Polesden Lacey. The public was fascinated. Queen Mary wrote to Elizabeth, quote 10, "The black tin trunk was dispatched from Polesden Lacey to Buckingham Palace. Inside were treasures that would reshape royal appearances for 3 generations. The black tin trunk that arrived at Buckingham Palace in 1943 contained riches that would reshape 3 generations of royal appearances. Over 60 pieces confirmed, though the exact number remains unknown even today. Margaret had never published a complete inventory. Some pieces she wore frequently, others remained in vaults, occasionally appearing at the most formal occasions. The Greville tiara was the most spectacular. Boucheron had created it for Margaret in 1921. Featuring a distinctive honeycomb pattern in diamonds, the geometric design was distinctly Art Deco. Hundreds of diamonds formed interlocking hexagons. The platinum setting was light despite its size. In 1953, the Queen Mother had Cartier alter the piece, adding additional height by reconfiguring some of the diamonds from the top line. The modified tiara became one of her favorites. She wore it to state banquets, diplomatic receptions, and gala performances. The Greville Emerald Kokoshnik came from Boucheron in 1919. A 93.7 carat cabochon emerald formed the center, surrounded by a halo of rose-cut diamonds and 6 smaller emeralds graduating on either side. The platinum and diamond creation represented the height of Art Deco jewelry design. The kokoshnik style referenced the traditional Russian headpiece. Grand duchesses had worn similar tiaras before the Revolution. The emerald's color was exceptional. Colombian emeralds of that size and quality were extraordinarily rare. The Greville Festoon Necklace came from Cartier in 1929. 5 rows of diamonds with detachable elements allowed the wearer to configure it multiple ways. The necklace could be worn long as a sautoir. It could be shortened for formal wear. Individual strands could be removed and worn as bracelets. The flexibility made it practical for different occasions and gown styles. The diamonds totaled over 100 carats. Other pieces included the Greville chandelier earrings from Cartier, featuring pear-shaped diamonds suspended from brilliant-cut studs. Multiple emerald necklaces added to the collection. Diamond and pearl sets offered variety. Items allegedly from Marie Antoinette's personal collection carried romantic provenance, though authentication remained uncertain. The ruby necklace from Boucheron dated to 1907, created when Margaret was still married to Ronald. The diamond pear-drop earrings came from Cartier in 1938, among Margaret's final purchases. The Queen Mother wore the pieces extensively from 1947 through her death in 2002. She first appeared in the Greville tiara publicly during the royal tour of South Africa in March of 1947. The war was over. She could finally display the inheritance without seeming insensitive. Newspapers photographed her wearing the honeycomb tiara. The public learned about Margaret's bequest. The story captivated the nation. Over the following decades, the Queen Mother wore different Greville pieces to different events. The emerald kokoshnik appeared at state dinners. The festoon necklace accompanied evening gowns. The chandelier earrings sparkled at the opera. Each appearance honored Margaret's memory, whether the Queen Mother consciously intended it or not. When the Queen Mother died in 2002, Queen Elizabeth II inherited the entire Greville bequest. She has worn some pieces publicly but maintained privacy around the collection. The royal family rarely discusses jewelry provenance. Many items have never been seen outside the royal vaults. Security concerns and personal preference keep some pieces hidden. Queen Camilla has worn the Greville tiara frequently in recent years. The honeycomb pattern suits her style. In November of 2019, she appeared at the diplomatic reception wearing the Greville Emerald Kokoshnik, the same tiara that Princess Eugenie had worn for her October 2018 wedding to Jack Brooksbank. The appearance reminded the public that Margaret's jewels remain active in royal wardrobes. The 93-carat emerald still catches light at state occasions. Princess Eugenie chose the emerald kokoshnik for her wedding because it suited her dress and coloring. The tiara had not appeared publicly in decades. Jewelry historians were excited. The wedding photographs showed the piece in detail. The emerald's color was even more impressive than archival photographs suggested. The full contents of that black tin trunk remain partially mysterious. Royal jewelry historians can confirm some pieces through photographs and documentation. Others exist only in fragmentary records. Margaret's personal jewelry inventory has never been published. The privacy surrounding the bequest means dozens of pieces may have never appeared publicly at all. They rest in vaults beneath Buckingham Palace, brought out occasionally for private family occasions. Margaret's jewelry collection continues to glitter at state occasions. The tiaras travel from vault to event and back again. Each appearance carries Margaret's legacy forward, whether current wearers know her story or not. The illegitimate daughter of a Scottish brewer adorns the heads of queens. The jewels travel from vault to state occasion and back again. But Polesden Lacey remains exactly where Margaret left it, 25 miles from London on the North Downs. The National Trust opened Polesden Lacey to the public in August of 1948. By then, the war had been over for 3 years. Britain was recovering. Rationing continued. The Labour government was building the welfare state. The trust made immediate decisions about what visitors could see. The ground floor showrooms would be preserved exactly as Margaret had left them. The bedrooms and servants' areas would remain closed. In 1942, officials believed upstairs spaces would not interest visitors. They underestimated public curiosity. The house opened to steady attendance. People wanted to see how one of Britain's wealthiest women had lived. They walked through the gold saloon where King Edward had dined. They stood on the terrace where the future King George VI and Queen Elizabeth had honeymooned. They examined the collections Margaret had spent decades assembling. The porcelain impressed, the paintings educated, the furniture demonstrated craftsmanship. Visitors from across Britain made pilgrimages to Surrey. In August of 1960, disaster struck. Fire destroyed approximately half of the roof. The blaze started in the early morning hours. Causes were never definitively established, possibly electrical. Possibly spontaneous combustion in old timbers. Ground floor ceilings suffered water damage from firefighting efforts. Estate workers rushed to rescue the collection. Paintings, furniture, porcelain, and silver were carried to safety. The house stood empty and damaged. Repair costs reached £65,000. Insurance covered the expense. The National Trust began restoration work immediately. Craftsmen rebuilt the roof using traditional techniques. They replastered damaged ceilings. They repaired water-damaged woodwork. On June 9, 1962, Polesden Lacey reopened to the public. The crisis had passed. Visitors returned. In 1995, the National Trust embarked on a major restoration program. Decades of wear required comprehensive attention. Hundreds of thousands of visitors had walked the floors. Textiles had faded. Woodwork needed refinishing. Conservation specialists examined every room, every piece in the collection, every element of the historic fabric. The work took years. Between 2008 and 2009, visitor facilities were extensively refurbished. A new car park replaced the old one, creating space for hundreds of vehicles. The cafe expanded, offering hot meals instead of just tea and cakes. New shops opened, including a farm shop selling produce from the estate. The improvements made it possible for visitors to access cafe and shops without paying admission to the house. Day visitors could enjoy the grounds without touring the collection. In 2011, the National Trust opened Mrs. Greville's private apartment to the public for the first time. The rooms where Margaret had actually lived, separate from the showroom she designed for entertaining, revealed a different side of her character, more personal, less performative. Her bedroom was modest. Her sitting room was comfortable rather than grand. The spaces showed how Margaret lived when not performing for guests. Current annual attendance exceeds 287,000 visitors, placing Polesden Lacey among the National Trust's top 10 most visited properties. The 1,600-acre estate offers multiple attractions. The Rose Garden, originally converted from a 19th-century kitchen garden and expanded westward in 1912, displays hundreds of varieties. The blooms peak in June. Visitors photograph the displays. The Long Walk, the 425-meter grass terrace with its commanding views, offers walks across the estate. The South Lawn, where visitors spread picnic blankets and watch sheep graze on the rolling hills beyond, provides recreational space. The collection contains more than 9,000 items preserved as Margaret intended. The paintings she and her father acquired hang in their original positions. The furniture from demolished country houses and Parisian dealers fills the rooms. The porcelain and silver she selected to impress Maharajas gleams in display cases. Everything remains on display as a testament to Edwardian excess and one-woman social ambition. Educational programs teach visitors about Edwardian entertaining. Costumed interpreters explain servants' lives. Conservation demonstrations show how specialists care for delicate objects. School groups learn about social history. The Trust has created a living museum. Margaret's grave sits on the grounds near the Rose Garden and the Dog Cemetery. She was buried there in September of 1942, exactly as her will specified. The placement was deliberate. She would remain at Polesden Lacey forever, closer to the dogs she protected with 10,000 pounds than to any human family. A simple stone marks the spot. Visitors sometimes leave flowers. Some upper floors remain closed to the public. The National Trust uses them as regional offices. Staff work in rooms where Margaret's guests once slept. Plans exist to open more spaces in 2027, with new interpretation about the history of the house and its treasures. Each opening reveals more of Margaret's world. Polesden Lacey exists today exactly as Margaret Greville intended, not as a royal palace, not as a Greville family seat, as a place where the largest number of people could have enjoyment thereof. The gates are open now. Anyone can walk through the gold saloon where Edward VII dined. Anyone can stand on the terrace where a future queen honeymooned. Anyone can see the collections Margaret spent a lifetime assembling. The jewels emerge for state occasions, worn by queens and princesses who never knew the woman who chose them as family. Margaret Greville was born with no legitimate claim to anything. She died having given away everything to everyone except those who might have expected it. The Greville barony went extinct in 1987 when the fourth Baron died without heirs. The family seat was sold, but Polesden Lacey endures, and the jewels still glitter at state banquets, and Margaret's final calculation proved correct. She understood that buildings outlast bloodlines, that institutions survive when families fail, that a woman who belonged to no one could choose to belong to everyone. The illegitimate daughter of a brewery magnate transformed herself into Dame Margaret Greville, friend of kings, hostess of queens, collector of treasures that would grace royal occasions for generations. She was called shrewd and kind and amusingly unkind. She was called a greedy toad who watered her chops at royalty. She entertained Hitler at Nuremberg and converted her palace into a hospital for British soldiers. She cultivated the future king and queen for decades, then changed her will when they ascended the throne. Every contradiction was calculated. Every choice served her vision of legacy. In the end, Margaret chose immortality through institutions rather than individuals. The National Trust preserves her palace. The royal family wears her jewels. The public walks her halls. The memory survives not through descendants, but through stone and gold and carefully curated collections. The black tin trunk has long since been emptied, the treasures scattered among vaults and display cases and royal necks. But the house on the North Downs remains, preserved exactly as she left it, a monument not to family or dynasty or inherited right, but to something Margaret Greville spent her entire life proving, that you can choose who inherits your story.